Inspiring illustrations. Ismael, son of Abraham. Who was Ismael? The story of Ismael, son of Abraham, is one of the most fascinating and significant in the Bible. Ismael, born from the union between Abraham and his Egyptian servant Hagar, was not the promised son. However, God took care of him and blessed him with a great offspring. Ismael's life is a testimony to God's love and grace, which extends to all, even those who are not considered heirs to the promise. In this video, you will discover all the details about Ismael, Abraham's beloved son. His story was marked by conflict between Sarah and her servant Hagar, Ismael's mother. Join us to discover more about this fascinating story. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, take the opportunity to do so now. Don't forget to activate all notifications so you don't miss any videos. The name Ismael has Hebrew origin and means God hears or God has heard, suggesting that a child so named was considered as the fulfillment of a divine promise. Abraham had great love for his son Ismael and even asked God to recognize him as the promised heir. However, God had made a promise to Abraham that he would have a descendant through his own wife Sarah, as recorded in Genesis, chapter 17. God instructed Abraham to circumcise Ismael and all the other men in his household, including the slaves born in his house and those bought from foreigners. When Abraham was circumcised, he was 99 years old and his son Ismael was 13 years old. Both were circumcised on the same day, along with all of Abraham's slaves. Circumcision was established as a sign of the covenant between God and Abraham and his descendants. At the time, circumcision was already practiced by neighboring peoples, but as a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Biblical circumcision is unique in that it is applied to male infants. Every boy should be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. The story of Ismael, son of Abraham, begins after Sarah, Abraham's wife, had difficulty getting pregnant and may have lost confidence that God would give her a son. Instead of waiting for the divine promise, she suggested to Abraham that he have relations with her servant Hagar so that she could have children through her. According to the book of Genesis chapter 16 between verses 1 to 16, Sarai, Abram's wife, had no children and had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. One day, Sarai suggested to Abram that he have relations with Hagar so that she could have children through her. Abram agreed and Sarai gave him Hagar as a concubine. This happened 10 years after Abram had moved to Canaan. Hagar became pregnant and began to despise Sarai. Sarai blamed Abram for Hagar's behavior and asked God to judge who was at fault. Abram told Sarai that Hagar was her slave and that she could do whatever she wanted with her. Sarai began to mistreat Hagar, who eventually ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar in the desert, near a spring on the way to Shur, and asked her where she was coming from and where she was going. Hagar replied that she was running away from her mistress. The angel of the Lord ordered her to return to her mistress and be obedient in everything. The angel of the Lord also said that he would make her descendants numerous and uncountable. Hagar was pregnant and would have a son named Ismael, for God had heard her cry of affliction. This son would be like a wild donkey, fighting against everyone and living far from his relatives. Hagar called the Lord the God who sees because he had spoken to her, and she wondered if she had really seen the one who saw her. The well between Kadesh and Bered is called the well of the living one who sees me because of this. Hagar, Abram's Egyptian servant, gave birth to a son for him, who was named Ismael. When Ismael was born, Abram was 86 years old. The name Ismael means God hears, for the Lord heard Hagar's suffering. This is mentioned in Genesis chapter 16, verse 11. The conflict between Sarah and Hagar reached its peak when Isaac was weaned. During Isaac's weaning feast, Ismael mocked him. Sarah was very offended and demanded that Abraham expel Hagar and her son. Sarah said to Abraham, "Expel this slave woman and her son, for this woman's slave son will not be an heir with my son Isaac." Abraham was greatly distressed by this situation because he loved his son Ismael. To better understand the story of Abraham, just watch the video that is being displayed at the top of the screen. God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and your slave. Do what Sarah tells you, for it is through Isaac that your offspring will be named. I will also make a nation of the slave's son, for he is your descendant." The next day, Abraham got up early and gave food and water to Hagar. He put the boy on her shoulders and sent her away. Hagar left, wandering through the desert of Beersheba. When the water ran out, she left the boy under a tree and went to sit a short distance away. She thought, "I can't bear to see my son die." She sat there while the boy cried. God heard the boy's cry, and the angel of God called Hagar from heaven and said, "Why are you worried, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the boy's cry where he is." Then God told her to lift up the boy and take him by the hand, for he would make his descendants a great nation. God opened Hagar's eyes and she saw well. She filled the skin with water and gave Ismael a drink. Protected by God, the boy grew up. Ismael lived in the desert of Paran and became a skilled archer. His mother arranged an Egyptian wife for him. Although Isaac remained as Abraham's only heir, Ismael and the other sons of Abraham with his concubines were also blessed by him, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 25. This means that both Hagar's son and the sons of Keturah received material goods from the patriarch. After reaching adulthood, the Bible does not record any disagreement between Ismael and Isaac. They are shown as responsible for burying Abraham in Machpelah in Genesis chapter 25, verse 9. Ismael became a great hunter. He was very skilled with bow and arrow. Hagar sought an Egyptian wife for Ismael, and with her he had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Later, Ismael's daughter married Esau, son of Isaac, as recorded in Genesis chapter 28, verse 9 and chapter 36, verse 3. The names of Ismael's sons are mentioned in Genesis chapter 25, between verses 13 and 15. The list is as follows: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish and Kedemah. Most of these names are mentioned in other biblical passages as influential tribal families of the time. The descendants of Ismael, son of Abraham, are generally identified as Ishmaelites in the Bible. They organized themselves into 12 tribes that lived in mobile camps in the southern desert, as described in Genesis chapter 25. Ismael died at the age of 137, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 25, verse 17. Although the Bible does not specify where he was buried, Muslim tradition states that he was buried in the Kaaba in Mecca. In the New Testament, Ismael is specifically mentioned by the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 4, verse 21. Paul used the figure of the slave son in his allegory about the opposition of legalistic religious people who persecuted those born according to the Spirit and enjoyed freedom in Christ. Ismael became a common name, and so other people are mentioned in the Bible with the same name. For example, there was a descendant of Saul and Jonathan named Ismael, a high-ranking official during the reign of Jehoshaphat, and the son of a priest during the time of Ezra, as mentioned in Ezra chapter 10, verse 22. However, among all the individuals mentioned, the most well-known was the son of Nethaniah, a member of the royal house of David. During the time of Babylonian oppression against the Jews, this Ismael killed Gedaliah, the governor of Judah appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. As we conclude our analysis of Ismael, son of Abraham, we can highlight several important points. Although Ismael was not God's promised son to Abraham, God still protected him. It was the Lord himself who chose Ismael's name and destined him for greatness, even while outside the covenant. Ismael was blessed with numerous descendants, just like Isaac's offspring, and this lineage was organized into 12 tribal clans. God also described Ismael's character, emphasizing the nomadic nature of his descendants and the opposition they would face in relation to the children of the covenant. Over time, Ismael's descendants joined with the Midianites, who were also descendants of Abraham through Keturah. This convergence of peoples and intertwined stories led the Ishmaelites and Midianites to be essentially the same people in several biblical passages. Today, Arabs trace their lineage back to Abraham primarily through Ismael. The story of Ismael goes beyond a simple personal biography. It reveals much about God's work and how His grace was poured out in the history of redemption. Ismael represents the natural birth resulting from the fertile relationship between Abraham and Hagar, while Isaac represents the supernatural birth in which God demonstrated His great power by allowing a 90-year-old barren woman to conceive a son. Thank you for watching and following our channel. Please don't forget to like, share, and leave your opinions in the comments below. Your feedback is always appreciated and helps me create more content that you will enjoy. In addition, we will soon be releasing a video about the complete story of Terah, Abraham's father. May God bless you. A big hug.